Okay, so now we're going to do a slightly more complex task. We're going to build a calculator program using a lot of the skills we just talked about. Now, I'm going to start by walking you through kind of, let's write out the algorithm or at least the structure for our program. And then I'm going to show you how we might do a couple of operations, but then I'm going to leave it to you to complete the rest of the operations and maybe do some other thinking through what kind of checking you might want to do. So let's go ahead and start a new file over here. We'll call it calculator.py. Let's start off by just planning out what our steps are going to be. So the first thing we're going to want to do in our calculator is we're going to want to ask the user what kind of operations they want to do. So for our calculator program, step 1, ask the user what operation they want to do. That'll give us, and we're going to start with the basics, just multiply, add, divide, subtract. We're going to start there, and that'll be a fairly easy program to work on. You should feel welcome to expand on that if you want to try and incorporate other operations, but that's where we're going to start for now. And then we want to ask the user which numbers they want to do the operations on. Okay. Then we need to sort of set up our calculation process. And based on the discussion we've already had, there's some opportunity for error here. So we're going to actually use a try and except clause to try to catch the errors and then give back to the user, right? So we're going to do try except to do the mathematical Good. Okay. And inside of there, here are the things we're going to do. We're going to convert the input to floats. Why might we want to convert to floats? Why do we have to convert the input at all? Questions to think about. We've discussed that, right? So why would we have to do that? Then let's go ahead and perform the operations. And then finally, if there is an exception, let's print an error message. And the way we structure this, we can do it in a couple of different ways, but we're going to do it one way. And if you want to think about other ways of structuring this program, feel free to do that too. But let's start off with one particular way to do it. Okay. So if we're going to structure this program, like we said, the first thing we want to do is ask our user for input on what operation they want to do. Operation is going to equal input with a prompt. Would you like to add, subtract, divide, or we'll just do multiply like that. We'll store that as operation. For now, let's just, so we know what we're choosing, let's go ahead and print that out. You chose operation. Okay, using an F string. Now let's start off with just two operations to start off with, and then we'll go from there. So let's say if operation equals either, let's do subtract or operation equal divide. Why might I want to test for these two particularly? What kind of information? Why are these two important and different from add or multiply? Something worth thinking about, right? Because I want to give some information to my user. I want to make sure my user remembers. Keep in mind that order matters with these two, right? That kind of information back to your user is really useful. So good thing to check and to remind them of as you go through. Okay, now we want to get which numbers they want to use. So for number 1, maybe not the best name, but I think actually for a calculator program, that's okay. We're going to take some input and ask them to please enter the first number. And I like to leave a little space at the end. Number 2. Please enter the second number. And again, I like to use second and first as opposed to number 1 or number 2, because that could get confused with someone might actually enter the number 1 or the number 2, right? So first and second helps us keep that a little bit clearer. And then what I like to do is I want to give them some information about what I'm about to do. So if operation equal multiply or operation equal divide, and you'll see why I'm switching it out this way this time, because when I print back a message to our user, I'm going to say, okay, to be clear, I will now operation num1 by num2. Why does it matter if that's multiply or divide? Well, read that out to yourself and see why that makes sense. If I were to put the word multiply in for operation, I will now multiply number 1 by number 2. Yeah, that works. I will now divide number 1 by number 2. Great. I will now subtract number 1 by number 2. Do we say subtract by? We don't really, right? We say subtract from. We say add to. So we're going to want different statements for each one of those to make sure that our user is getting information that they can read and understand. That's an accessibility issue, right? So that people who are reading this can understand what we want them to understand. And it's just better user experience, right? UX design. So something to think about. I'm not going to type that all now, but that is something I'm going to ask you to do, is to think about, okay, if we're doing add and subtract, how do those statements look different? Now we're on to the part where we want to do a little error handling and make sure we're checking that our input is good. So we'll do try num1, and I can do this in list format again, are going to equal the float version of what was passed in and the float version of what was passed in for num2. So we're just changing those to from num1 to num2 to the float version of those. And you'll notice they didn't change the variable name. One of the nice things about Python is I actually don't have to. It's gonna just write over what was there before with the new variable name and everything. So that's nice. If, and in here I'm gonna go ahead and do the operation, right? So if operation equal divide, what am I gonna do? I'm gonna make some new result variable, and I'm going to set it equal to num1 divided by num2. Elif operation equal multiply. We're going to do the same thing, except we're going to use the multiplication operator. Num1, and you know what I mean when I say operator, right? It's one of our mathematical operators. And then after that, we just want to print out our result. Really simple. And because we did a try, we're going to need to have an accept block. And the accept block is really going to get triggered here when the numbers don't translate to floats well. So all we want to say is, hey, error, invalid numbers. Okay. The order of this might make a difference, right? And you may want to think about that. You may want to try this stuff up here, try the converting up here so you can print out the exception earlier in the process rather than going through all the math down, rather than setting up all the math and like saying, I will now do this, and then you don't actually do that, right? This coming down here might make more sense, or converting in a try block up top and then doing the math later down might also make sense. So the order to this how it flows might work a little bit different depending on what you do, and that's fine. That's actually a good idea. All right, so let's go ahead and run our calculator program here. Let me clear this. You probably saw in my console down here, I was already running a version of this, so let's go ahead and run it now. What would you like to do? I want to multiply. You choose multiply. You chose multiply. Please enter the first number. And notice it didn't say, keep in mind order matters, because it's multiplication. Order doesn't matter, right? So let's do 50 times 75, and we get 3,750, which is perfect. Great, that works exactly the way we wanted to. Let's go ahead and run the program again. This time, let's choose divide. I don't love the way this looks, so that's another thing we want to fix. Please enter the numbers. Let's do 10 and 5, and we get 2 back. All right, let's fix this little spacing issue here. When we pick our operation, let's put a colon and a space. That's nicer. One of the other things I want to show you that I think is interesting is what happens if we run our program and we type multiply. You choose multiply, enter first number 10, enter second number 5, error, invalid numbers. Wait a minute, 10 and 5 aren't invalid numbers, so what happened? Well, we chose multiply with a capital M. So we've got this error in our program now that this operation doesn't work. So it prints out this error here, and the error says the numbers are invalid when in fact the operation was invalid. So that's kind of an issue. Okay, so I'm going to leave you there with some really big tasks to complete. So task number 1, fix the capital operation issue. And that's the one I just explained here, right? So if I write capital D divide or capital M multiply, the program should still work. And if they type an operation that doesn't exist, maybe we need to catch that earlier and think about a way to do that. We might also, for more convenience, add in shorthands. Put an M, a D, an S, and an A all work. Okay, so I want you thinking about how do you want to fix the operation input piece, but particularly what you have to do is make sure that I can enter multiply with a capital M or multiply with a lowercase m, and both will work. And there's a couple of different ways to fix that. Number 2, I want you to add addition functionality, meaning we should be able to add. I want you to add subtraction functionality for an additional point. I want you to add a message like this that says I will now, but that makes sense for addition and subtraction. So those will be additional points too, right? So a message about addition, and another point for a message about subtraction. So instead of saying I will now subtract 10 by 4, I wanted to say I will now subtract 4 from 10, or I will now add 5 and 5, or 5 to 5, something like that. Something that would sound as like a natural way of saying those two things. Okay, so we have that. Okay, so I think those are the big issues I want you to complete. So this is a 5-point project you're going to turn in at the end of the day, where you're going to have add and subtract added in with the messages about addition, about subtraction. You're going to fix the capital on the operation issue, and if you want to add in more functionality about being able to press just M, A, S, and D, that's fine too. And then that's it. Turn that in when you're all done. Good luck.